In this video, I'm going to show you how I finished out the shed and the loft in my greenhouse, which the kids love, right? You love it?
Love.
Yeah, they love it. Okay. Our project today is going to be putting up our insulation. This is a great project for us today because it is so cold and snowy outside. We're trying to get as much heat to stay in as possible so that it's a little more comfortable for us to be working in here. Now, as we put this up, we just staple it on each side. We went ahead and we got a slightly lower R value for our insulation because we weren't as worried about it with it being in the greenhouse, but we do want it to stay warmer in the winter time. But you could go for a higher R value if you're concerned about your area. At this point, we're putting up our ceiling in the little shed portion. Now we're using 1/8 of an inch boards. These are actually from some hollow closet doors that we ended up taking off, and we had them sitting around just waiting for a project. So evidently this is one. So it's 1/8 of an inch. You know, you could really use any thin board to do this with. Now, in order to attach it, the first thing we did is we put some little blocking, I guess, I don't know, we put some little boards up right along the edge so that we could attach it to it, so that it's attached on the edges, not just on the 2x4s that are going across. And we attached it using a pneumatic staple gun, and this will work super great because we're going to trim out the edges anyways, and so you won't even be able to see what we did here, but it will give it a much more finished look, which is kind of what we're going for with this project. Before I put in my flooring or put my wooden walls up, I went ahead and did all my painting. I painted the doorway, I painted the ceiling, I painted the windowsills. Now, you wouldn't necessarily have to paint the ceiling if you didn't want to, but for me, I felt like painting the ceiling white kept it from feeling too dark and closed in there. It kind of still gave it that open, airy feel instead of the dark closet kind of feeling. But definitely important to do this before you get the flooring on because it gets all over you. I decided to put my floor down before I put the walls down. I'm going to do a floating floor. I think this will work best for this instance. When I worked on the loft, I did an adhesive one, but I like this a little bit better. This is similar to some stuff that we've done in the past, and we happen to have some left over from a previous project. The big key that I've found with this is clicking them together to each other lengthwise before you click them in together, and using blocks to hold them up so that they don't lock completely until you're 100% ready, so that you don't break off any of those little locking points. I love working with the pallet wood for this kind of a project because it adds a lot of character without adding a lot of expense. A lot of times you can get the aged pallet boards, which is actually what I want. Sometimes it's a little bit difficult to work around some of their character, but that character is the whole reason that I like them, so it's worth it to me. I like to have the nail holes, have the screw holes. I don't want it to look like it's falling apart, but I do want to have some of that character to it. I want it to look like reclaimed wood, not something new that I bought from the store. With that in mind, when I sand it, I sand down lightly. I want to make it so that I get rid of the top stuff that's maybe not looking so great, but I want to leave some of that old aged patina. For these walls, the only portion that's going to be showing is the facing, so that's the only part that I'm going to sand off. So I'm working on my shed wall, and I've ran into a bit of an issue. This is what my lovely aged boards look like, which is fabulous, but a person only has so many aged pallets laying around. So when I have gone to get new pallets, some of them look like this. Now, if I had actually planned my wall like that, and the portion I'd done already had some of the lighter wood and some of the darker wood in it, it would be no big deal. Or, I mean, I guess there's the possibility that you could do like burning along the top of it. There's a lot of different things that you could do with the pallets. But for me, I really wanted something to match the design that I get when I take this and then sand it down and get that. Or this and sand it down and get that. And I mean, you'll notice that it's a lot lighter than this one is, but it's not as light as this, which is just too much. So what I did is I went ahead and I took Wood Effects, the charred one, but I've also done a couple different ones with different colors of stain because I don't want them to all be the same because my aged palette boards are also quite different. So I try to make sure that they're all a little bit different. And I just put a really light coating of it on here. And then on this side, you can see what it looks like as it gets sanded down. So this is going to be a much more natural look together than this would be. So that is my solution for this bit of a problem here. It does add a bit more time, so if you can find them all aged or just kind of factor the lighter boards into your randomness, then that would work too. But this is the look I'm going for, so that's what I'm going to do to fix it. Now that the boards are all ready, it's time to put our palette boards up on the wall. I'm super excited about this because this is one of the last big things that I need to do to get the shed ready. Along with that, I also really think that the palette wood is beautiful, especially with the way that you sand it down. I'm showing the multiple different layers and the different colors. Really fun, especially with there being different paints that end up getting used on different ones. It's all full of character. Now, one of the things that I do as I build the wall up is I try to make sure that I use different sizes and thicknesses of palette boards just depending on what I have, because if they're all one type, then I get locked into that. I have to do that on the entire thing. Whereas if I'm able to factor in a couple of different kinds, then it looks like it's planned as opposed to, you know, all one kind on one wall and all a different kind on a different wall and clustered of little ones and big ones. But so try to make them kind of sporadic so that it looks like it was done on purpose. You could use screws for this, but I'm just using a nailing gun because it is so fast. When you're putting in the palette boards, you have to figure out which way is going to make it so that they have the least amount of gap, because you're going to have gap pretty much no matter what. I guess the only way you could get around that is if you decided to rip along the edges to make it so that they were all exactly the same size. I suppose that could make a difference if you were that worried about it. A lot of times when you're doing this, you know, you want it to be a little more rustic anyway. It doesn't bother me too much, except for there's a few tiny spots where I can see some of the writing that's on the insulation. And then for the very top level, what you want to do is rip down your boards to the size that you need and squeeze them in there. Keep it tight though. You don't want too many gaps up at the ceiling. Starting to get dark outside, but I really don't want to stop doing this trim. It actually took a fair amount of time to get the trim done today, and all prepped, getting it all cut and ready to go and stained, and so now it's finally ready for me to put on the walls. It's still a little bit oily, so my hands are getting nice and stained too, but you just use the finishing nails for these. I trimmed out the window. I did a really tiny board around the inside before I even turned the camera on, so I'm sorry about that. And I did the same thing around the inside of the cut end of the boards on the door as well. And then went ahead and framed out the door, framed out the window, and framed out the end walls and the ceiling, including where all those transitions are on the ceiling between the panels. The finishing nailer can just be really difficult to deal with just because those nails that you use are so flexible. If they hit a nail or a screw or just a hard bit of wood, all of a sudden they're curling back around at you, and so they can come out in kind of funky areas. So just kind of watch for that. Make sure your hand's not anywhere near it so that it doesn't get you. Now all that's left to do on the interior of the shed is just the little finishing work. I'm putting on my light covers, I'm putting on my outlet covers, and then it's just a matter of getting it set up in here. A couple of years ago I made this shelving unit for my craft room, and it worked fabulously, but I ended up deciding that it would work really well in here. I was kind of done using it in the craft room anyways. I also had made these bins for use in one of my children's room, but we also changed the way that we were doing things in there, and they fit in here just perfectly. The one downside, underneath the very bottom, I'm afraid that I'm going to scratch the floor as I'm pulling these bins in and out. So what I'm going to do is flip them over and put on some wheels. I used 5/8 of an inch roller ball bearings for the wheels, and I just made sure I transitioned it across both boards that were on the bottom, and then it just worked beautifully for pushing in and out underneath the shelf. Since I had a little bit of brick board that I had painted previously, I thought it might be kind of fun to incorporate that into the back. And so I'm cutting some of that out, and we'll see how it goes. You know, maybe I'll love it, maybe I won't. I don't have enough to do the full back portion. So there's a possibility that I'll decide to go and buy some more, but more than likely I'll incorporate something else if I don't have enough of this to cover the back. I really like the idea of using this up in the loft because I feel like it incorporates in another element and just another kind of feel to it. So I was able to get the brick to almost fit my back wall up in the loft. But that's okay because I'm going to need to trim the outside edges of the brick anyways, because you can't get it like perfectly cut to match up with the boards that you have there, especially with the angles. It's a little bit difficult. Maybe someone else could, but I can't. So I'm already going to trim that out anyway. So the few locations where I have a little gap, because I had to do 2 different pieces, I'll just trim that out. And you won't even know that it wasn't planned from the beginning. It's kind of neat to see what you can do to utilize the things that you have. I don't know, since we've started trying to do that, I just feel like it's given us opportunities to use our creativity a little bit more. Now this is really easy to attach. All I'm doing is using liquid nail, and there are a few little spots that are difficult to get the boards in, particularly since there'll be like a little nail sticking out or something of that nature. But besides that, it should be a pretty easy install. So our brick walls are all up, all glued in. Now at this point, I've already cut all my trim. I've painted it because trust me, you don't want to paint that stuff once it's all the way up against another painted board like that. That's just asking for trouble. And now it's just time to put it in. And I'm putting this one in with a pneumatic nailer. It's a finishing nail. And I'm using the 3/4 inch because I don't want it to poke out the back. If it does a little bit, it's okay because we'll be putting the siding over it. But you know, you don't really want a ton of them sticking out. It is time for us to move on to installing the flooring up in the loft area. We're just going to do some of the vinyl self-adhesive stuff. Now we just have some leftover from a previous project, so this works super great for us. There is a primer that you can put on, which would probably be a good idea. We're not going to in this case, but if you're going to do it, probably a good idea too. Now that I've got the flooring down, I'm going to finish out the wall by putting the trim at the base, which covers the edge of the flooring as well as that transition to the wall. For this, I'm just going to leave it black. It was actually some wood that we had for a shelf that we cut down smaller, and so this works for us. I think the black actually is a nice contrast up here. At this point on my loft project, all I need to really do to finish the structural stuff is to add my branches as my little banisters that will keep all the blankets up, you know, that kind of a thing. And fortunately, or unfortunately, depending on how you look at it, one of the branches in our willow tree fell down this winter, and so I can go ahead and go through those lovely windy branches and see if I can find some wonderful ones that will work for my loft. It's always a little bit difficult when you're cutting the branches to get them to be exactly flat on one side and exactly flat on the other side so that it can be flush when you put it in. But the best way that I've found to do this is just have a stop block on your saw so that you cut the one end flat and then you can press it against that to make sure that you're cutting the other end flat as well. I finally got the rest of the rungs that I needed for the ladder, which was a good thing because we found that it was a little too high of a step on the bottom, and at the top you kind of felt like you didn't really know what to hold on to. The banister posts helped a lot, but it's still, especially for little hands, was too much. So I wanted to provide a number of different locations that the kids could grab onto depending on what made them feel the most comfortable. Above all, we want this to be a safe location for them to be able to come up. since that first step was too big of a step for our little guy, we decided to go ahead and add a rung to the very bottom of the ladder. But that did involve me having to put some more supports on the other side. Luckily enough, we hadn't put the siding up or the walls up on the inside on top of the insulation. So I was just able to cut some of that out and put it in. And then it was just a matter of measuring things out and getting placement for this bottom piece. Now it's time to put in all of those lovely handholds up at the top. This should make it a lot easier for the kids to get in and out. I'm doing a couple different ones just so that when they come at it from different angles, it'll be easier for them. So I brought Eli, my youngest little one, out to test the ladder. He's gonna give it a try and see if it works better for him. So let's see how it goes. Better?
Yeah.
Okay.
Much better.
Good, good.
Because there's these two handles which you can handle.
Yeah.
Hold on to. And I can easily reach them.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. So you like it, Eli?
Yeah.
Yeah? It's good?
Yep.
2 thumbs up? All right. Well, can you get back down?